Every now and then, life has a habit of proving you completely wrong about something. For years, I'd believed that Victorinox made the best Swiss Army knives and Leatherman made the best plier-based multi-tools. Stay in your lane, end of discussion. And then a good friend of mine lent me this. And within a few hours, I realised two things. First, I'd been carrying around a completely baseless prejudice for years. And secondly, I'd actually been handed a hidden treasure. This isn't just another SwissTool Spirit. It's one of the original ones that started the whole Spirit range. So let's have a look. So like I said, this isn't my SwissTool Spirit, or perhaps I should say my SwissTool Spirit XC as it is now known. It belongs to the same friend who very kindly lent me the Explorer for that earlier video. The funny thing is, I could have borrowed it months ago, but I didn't. Because somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself that when it came to full-sized plier multi-tools, Leatherman had already won. The Wave Plus was the benchmark, and in order not to disturb the natural order of things, I simply had to review this first. Otherwise, the moon would blot out the sun, cows would explode into plagues of locusts, and the end times would be upon us. In other words, for once, I was the one being the tool. So I finally borrowed it, and pretty much as soon as I got this into my grubby little mitts, the ergonomics, the beautifully finished stainless steel, and the sheer quality of the craftsmanship started ripping my long-held assumptions a much belated new one. Just look at it. 20 odd years of use and it still feels absolutely superb. Everything has that unmistakable Victorinox precision, like this plier head. Every edge that's supposed to be softened has been softened. Every tool snaps open with that lovely crisp action and click, and has its own dedicated back spring, which is Victorinox applying decades of pocket knife experience to a plier-based multi-tool. And while the locking mechanism is simple, it's also secure and really well engineered. What's really interesting about this particular Spirit is its age. When Victorinox launched it in 2004, it wasn't called the Spirit XC. It was simply the SwissTool Spirit, a slimmer, lighter and more ergonomic alternative to the original SwissTool. There was no Spirit X or Spirit S at that point because there was no Spirit range. This one was the tool that started it all. Only later, as Victorinox introduced other versions, did this particular configuration start to become unofficially known as the Victorinox SwissTool Spirit XC. So the question is, just how early is this one in particular? Well, Victorinox didn't exactly make life easy. There's no serial numbers on the Spirit, so you have to build the case from a series of production changes. And the starting point is 2004 because that's when Victorinox launched the Spirit. Remember, the XC designation didn't come around until 2014 or later. Now, the first clue is on the plier head. This early tool still has the Victorinox shield stamped into the pliers. That shield was phased out in 2010, with the shieldless head becoming standard from around 2011 onwards. And the second clue is on the handle. On this Spirit, the shield sits beside the word Victorinox. At around the same 2010 transition, Victorinox rearranged the branding and moved the shield above the name. So the old handle and plier head layout tells us this is from the original 2004 to 2010 production period. Then we come to the rather wonderfully named butter blade. The blunt-tipped, partially serrated sheep's foot blade was one of the defining features of the original Spirit when it first appeared in 2004, and it remained in production as the XC with this blade until approximately 2019 or 2020. The really useful clue is stamped onto the blade itself. This blade carries the older VSSR marking, Victorinox Switzerland Stainless Rostfrei. Now that VSSR stamp is dated to the period ending during 2005. From sometime in 2005 onwards, Victorinox began using the newer 3-line tang stamp, Victorinox Swiss-made Stainless. That does not necessarily mean the entire multi-tool was assembled before or during 2005. Victorinox could have manufactured this blade in 2005 or earlier, kept it in component stock, and then fitted it into a Spirit assembled in 2005 or 2006. But it does give us an important upper limit for the blade itself. I'm reasonably confident that this blade is from 2005 or earlier. Now, I did ask my friend when he got it, and he said about 20 years ago, give or take a couple of years. So, putting the evidence together, the Spirit was launched in 2004, so it can't be from before then. The shield on the plier head and the handle's old logo layout tells us that it came out before the changes in 2010. The 4-line tang stamp tells us that the blade itself was produced either in 2005 or before. So I can't prove whether the complete tool left the factory in 2004, 2005 or 2006. But I can say that nothing rules out 2004, and the physical evidence places it firmly within the very earliest period of SwissTool Spirit production. So this isn't merely an old Spirit, it's quite possibly one of the original launch era examples. So looking at the chassis and form, even 20 years on, I still think this is one of the most elegant multi-tools ever made. Now, on paper, the Spirit sits in exactly the same class as tools like the Leatherman Wave Plus. I'll put the published dimensions and weight on the screen rather than getting out rulers and scales. The numbers are useful, but what really interests me is harder to quantify. It's how these tools actually feel in the hand. Now, the Spirit is actually about half a centimetre longer than the Wave Plus, which to me has always felt like solid, rugged quality. But because the Spirit's handles are narrower, more rounded and contoured, it never feels like the larger of the two tools. To me, it feels slimmer and above all more refined. And I think a lot of that comes from this butterfly construction. It's not just a clever way of folding the pliers away, it dictates the entire shape of the tool. And as these handles taper towards the ends, every implement inside has to be designed around that shape. You'll see that with the file and with the wood saw. Now, compared to a 91mm Swiss Army knife, you'll see they're shaped differently. Not because Victorinox wanted them to cut differently, but because they had to fit inside this elegant and sleek chassis. And I think that is what introduces what is probably the defining characteristic of the Spirit as a whole. This is a multi-tool built firstly around form and then deliberate compromises. Now, every multi-tool is a series of engineering trade-offs. You improve one aspect and almost inevitably something else has to give. It's also interesting that if you look at something like the Roxon Flex, you can certainly see echoes of this same butterfly handle architecture. Whether that's coincidence or inspiration, it's a layout that has proven to be remarkably practical. The other thing I really appreciate is that every single implement is accessible from the outside. There are 10 implements in total, 5 in each handle, some with multiple functions. And apart from the plier head itself, you never have to unfold the tool just to get at what you need. Now, there is a small learning curve here because Victorinox had to package everything into these tapered handles. Some of the nail nicks face inwards and others face outwards. When you first pick up a Spirit, you can spend a fair bit of time hunting around for the right implement. But here's the clever bit, there's never a tool where you have to open another implement just to get to the nail nick for the one you're looking for. Everything is directly accessible. And the only tool that doesn't have a nail nick at all is the inline Phillips driver. It doesn't need one. The shape of the driver's head gives you all the purchase you need to pull it open. And if you've ever used Victorinox's inline Phillips on models like the Explorer or the Swiss Champ, you'll feel immediately at home here. In my opinion, it's one of the best dedicated screwdrivers Victorinox has ever produced. So yes, the layout takes a little while to learn, but this was never intended to be a tool that you'd use for a weekend before replacing. It's supposed to be a tool for life, and the more time you spend with it, the more intuitive it becomes. Before long, your hands simply know where everything lives. Now let's have a look at those individual implements. Let's start with the heart of any multi-tool, the pliers. Now, although quite slender, they don't shy away from work in the strength department. They taper down to a needle nose point, making them excellent for reaching into confined spaces and gripping small components. Now, this particular Spirit has clearly lived a working life. If you look closely at the tip here on the lower jaw, you'll see a small chip where some of the tip has been knocked away. Now, I don't know exactly how that happened, and I'm not going to speculate, but to me, that's simply honest wear on a tool that spent years doing exactly what it was designed to do. The slim nose means you're sacrificing a little brute strength compared with some heavier duty multi-tools, but once again, that is a deliberate compromise. Victorinox clearly prioritised precision over sheer bulk, and personally, I think they made the right decision. Moving back, we have two separate cutting areas. The main cutters are intended for softer wire, while closer to the pivot, there is a dedicated hardwire cutter where the tool has a greater mechanical advantage. And here we can see that in use on a thicker paper clip. There we go. No bother. The one feature you won't find here is a return spring. So today we're rather used to spring-loaded pliers on many multi-tools, but back in 2004, that wasn't really an expectation from a premium full-size tool like this. Would I enjoy having a spring? Yes. Do I think it's a major omission? Not really. And I think that's a decent example of the design philosophy we've already talked about. Victorinox could have made these pliers chunkier. They could have prioritised outright gripping force. They could have added a return spring. Instead, they chose form, simplicity and precision. And whether you agree with those decisions or not, they're clearly deliberate and they define the character of the Spirit. All right, the PH1/2 screwdriver, the only implement which doesn't have a dedicated nail nick, and that's because its head is just one big double nail nick. So let's have a look at this. The geometry on this is excellent. So this is ostensibly for PH1/2 screws, but because of this fanning out property that it has here on one of these sides, on two of these sides, it will actually deal with some PH3 screws as well. So let's see how it deals with PH1 and PZ1s. So this is a PZ1, no problem there at all. All right, so here we have a PH2 screw on a radiator / aircon unit that I need to remove. And in we go here with the SwissTool Spirit. And we can see that it's making pretty short work of it, even though the screw is slightly recessed. This long neck on the screwdriver really helps. These propeller blades are held on with screws that are meant to be removed with a Phillips head 3 PH3 hex bit. So let's give that a go now. And because of this wider head here, this superb geometry, it engages really well and there's next to no wiggle. So here we go, let's start undoing, and yeah, those are coming out really quickly. Let's put that back. Even though this is ostensibly a PH1/2 screwdriver, it will do very well on larger screws because of the configuration of the screwdriver head. So now we come to what is probably the most controversial implement on the entire SwissTool Spirit, the blade. Now, this is two-hand opening, which was still very much the norm back in 2004. And this blade has a cutting edge of about 6 centimeters. The first 4.5 centimeters are serrated, and the last 1.5 centimeters is left as a plain edge. And instead of finishing in a conventional point, it has this rounded profile, which has earned it the rather unflattering nickname of the butter blade. It certainly divides opinion. Some hate it, some really like it. Personally, I think it's great. I think the problem is that a lot of folks were expecting a conventional pocket knife blade, but I think Victorinox designed it to be the ultimate wide range cutting tool, and those two things aren't necessarily the same thing. Now, if I'm at home and I need to shave a little bit of timber off to make some wood fit into a joint or something, then this 1.5 cm of plain edge is perfectly up to the task. And if I'm camping and need to turn a stick like this into a tent peg, then again, this little 1.5 cm is enough to bring this to a point. But realistically, those aren't the jobs that I'm using a multi-tool cutting blade for most often. Most of the time I'm cutting rope, paracord, webbing, cardboard, packaging, and other fibrous materials. And that is exactly where a serrated blade like this earns its keep. And again, while out camping, there's another regular job, food prep. And what more fibrous material is there than mashed potato in its raw, unmashed form? Now, I wouldn't choose a 6 cm multi-tool blade to prepare a whole Sunday roast, but for preparing a simple campsite meal, a sandwich, or just cutting up an apple, this blade is awesome. In fact, if you've seen my video on the Victorinox Handyman, you may remember me saying that I would actually prefer its longer main blade to be serrated. And I still mean that. Honestly, if my Handyman had a wire stripper that actually cuts, and this blade, that would tick all my empty boxes. By the way, if you've made it this far into the video, thank you. I really do appreciate it. And if you enjoy this kind of detailed look at Swiss Army knives, multi-tools and everyday carry gear, then please consider subscribing to the Clown's Pocket. There's plenty more content like this on the channel. So I think one reason this blade attracts so much criticism is that people tend to concentrate on the things it cannot do rather than what it can do, which brings us to the most obvious criticism of all: it doesn't have a point. And that is undeniably true. If this were the only implement available, the lack of a piercing point would be a significant limitation. But it isn't the only implement available, because Victorinox gave the Spirit this. This is the awl or reamer or pokey, if like me you can never remember whether it's the awl or reamer that has the sewing eye. Anyway, rather than trying to make the knife blade do even more, Victorinox put the piercing tasks onto the reamer, which also has a 2.5 cm sharp edge. So if I need to get into a bag of animal feed like this, I would use the pokey first and then switch to the butter blade if I wanted to split this bag wide open and the reamer couldn't handle it. There's a lot of debate here, but I believe Victorinox gave the blade this rounded edge to make the serrated parts stronger and work better on the pull cut, and to avoid accidental puncture, catching on clothing, etc. And they shifted piercing over to the awl or reamer or pokey or whatever. That's another compromise and a design choice, and there's nothing saying that everyone has to be on board with that arrangement. Fortunately, the later pointy bladed versions of the Spirit are now there for anyone wanting one conventional blade that can slice, carve and pierce without changing implements. And from there we can move on to another implement whose unusual shape this time was dictated partly by the Spirit's butterfly chassis, the scissors. So these are sharp and precise, and they use a robust back spring rather than the familiar replaceable leaf spring. But they have one obvious limitation. They simply don't open very far, and that severely limits the thickness of material you can get between the blades. For paper and thread, fingernails and other small jobs, they work extremely well, but they're less versatile than the larger opening scissors on a 91mm Swiss Army knife. And that is another deliberate compromise imposed by the Spirit's compact chassis. Next up, we have the can and bottle openers. These will be familiar to anyone owning a 91mm sack, although the cap lifter especially is noticeably bigger than those on Swiss Army knives. As well as opening bottles, the cap lifter also serves as a large flathead screwdriver, and it's a decent light duty pry tool as well, while the can opener also incorporates a smaller flathead and 2D Phillips. And here it is on a Phillips type screw. Actually, it's Posidrive, but you get the idea. For opening cans, it uses Victorinox's familiar push cut design. It's efficient, predictable, and leaves a smooth edge with very little effort. The bottle opener does exactly what you'd expect. It removes caps cleanly, but in my opinion, being the Spirit's primary prying implement, is much more useful and ultimately its most important aspect. That's actually worth mentioning because at one point I wondered whether Victorinox might have been better fitting an eagle's claw or some other combination opener here instead, but I changed my mind because losing this pry tool would have been a backward step. Now, this bottle opener also incorporates a small wire stripping notch which doesn't cut plastic wire insulation and is meant to be used after a blade has made a score line. And I'll be honest, I've never been very impressed with these notches that don't cut. Fortunately, someone at Victorinox must have recognised that as well, because elsewhere on the Spirit they included what I would call real wire strippers alongside a decent chisel. And I would love to see something like these wire cutters on the 91mm Swiss Army knife range in the future. So these have two sizes of cable strippers which actually cut, which is utterly fantastic, if not very easy to do on camera. But yeah, look, it gets into the insulation. The other thing that I really like about this chisel is that the vast majority of chisel / scraper tools on multi-tools only have the beveling on the very front. If you look here, you can see that the beveling is on the corners as well, which helps you use this in a much more precise manner and like an actual proper chisel, at least down this one side, which I think for a multi-tool is a hell of a lot better than most things out there. And it's even more amazing when you think this thing is 20 years old. SwissTool Spirit also comes with a 2mm screwdriver. Now, the flathead screwdriver on the can opener is actually supposed to be 3mm, but it isn't very good at getting into these kind of recessed screws. However, for electrical components and this kind of thing, this longer head is absolutely perfect, and this is the 2mm screwdriver, which is perfect for electrical type work and whatever, that comes on the SwissTool Spirit. Obviously, this isn't insulated, but it does show that Victorinox clearly recognized the need for being able to do this kind of work and filled it. Next, we have the wood saw, and if you've watched my Victorinox content before, you'll know I'm a big fan of Victorinox saws, and this one is no exception. Despite its relatively compact size, it cuts very quickly and clears sawdust efficiently, whether you're working with green wood or seasoned timber. And the comfortable handles of the Spirit also make it very easy to apply consistent pressure throughout the cut. The fact that it cuts in both directions on the push and on the pull stroke also makes it highly efficient. Here you can see it in action on this piece of pine. The final implement is the file, and once again it is very nicely executed. The cross-cut pattern is pleasantly aggressive, so it removes material quickly without feeling coarse or poorly finished. It is rather slender in comparison to the file on a 91mm, but that's again because it has to fit into these ergonomic handles. However, one detail I particularly like is that the file runs right to the very end of the implement. Victorinox haven't left an uncut section at the tip as they have here on this Handyman, so you can use the full length of the file even when working into corners or confined spaces. The edge on the file is also cut to form a metal saw, allowing it to cut softer metals, plastics and similar materials when required. And like so many of the Spirit's implements, it isn't trying to be a workshop replacement, but as a compact, high-quality file and metal saw, it's very well executed and another example of Victorinox's attention to detail. This particular original SwissTool Spirit, well before it was known as the XC, came in this fabric and leather pouch, without the additional accessory sets supplied with some later versions. There is, however, a small coupling point here at the end of the tool. Victorinox offered a removable corkscrew that would attach here, and owners were able to purchase it separately if they wanted one. It's a simple way of adding that function without making the Spirit itself any larger. And before I wrap this up, I want to mention the riveted construction. Now, some people won't like that because it means you can't just get a couple of Torx drivers out, take the whole thing apart and start tweaking it. But to me, that's missing the whole point. These rivets tell us a lot about Victorinox's attitude to this tool. They're basically saying, trust us, the implements are perfectly fitted, everything's been adjusted at the factory, we've done all there is to do, and this tool is perfect as is. And that is how they expect the tool to stay. In other words, this isn't a multi-tool that's been designed for anyone to personalize or modify. It's been designed to come out of the box as a finished product. And looking at this example, which is now more than 20 years old and still works beautifully, I'd say they've earned the right to be that confident. So after spending some time with the original SwissTool Spirit XC, what do I actually think of it? Well, I think Victorinox achieved what they set out to achieve. This is a carefully considered balance of size, capability and comfort, where every decision and every compromise is 100% considered and 100% deliberate. Would I buy one? If I was new to EDC but somehow knowing what I know today? Yes, absolutely. I mean, it would be such a solid foundation to start from because I genuinely admire what Victorinox have accomplished here. Do I need one now? Honestly, no. My current carry already covers everything I ask of my multi-tools. But that doesn't stop me wanting one. I mean, the engineering and ergonomics are absolutely immaculate, so I have no hesitation in recommending one. If I did have one though, I'd keep it in an EDC pouch. And rather than pairing it with something like a Victorinox Swiss Army knife, I'd probably pair it with something like the Roxon Flex Companion. The Spirit already takes care of so much exceptionally well. I would just configure the Companion's loadout to cover specific gaps that this doesn't, like the hex bit adapter, T-shank holder, depth gauge, that kind of thing. And together they would make a remarkably capable combination with hardly any overlap. But the star of the show would definitely be the Spirit without a doubt. All that's left now is for me to return this one to its owner with my sincere thanks for trusting me with it. More than 20 years after it was made, it's still beautifully built, still a pleasure to use, and thoroughly deserving of its reputation. I've genuinely enjoyed getting to know it, and I'm really going to miss having it around. So, as ever, thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into one of Victorinox's finest multi-tools, then please consider liking, subscribing and leaving a comment below. I always like seeing what you've got to say. Till next time on The Clown's Pocket, all the best and bye-bye.